Elixir has several control flow structures, similar to most other languages, such as if-else statements. Actually, I shouldn't have used the word statement. It's actually an expression. What do I mean by expression? Well, an expression is code that evaluates to a value, or as I like to think about it, it's code that returns a value. In fact, everything in Elixir is an expression. In other words, every bit of code you type is part of an expression that returns a value. This might seem weird if you've never used an expression-based language before, so let's warm up to the idea with some code examples. But before I start, I've got a challenge for you. I'm going to write some code in a moment that might look correct at first glance, but in reality, there will be one or more bugs in my code. Your challenge is to see if you can figure out what's wrong with my code before I point it out to you. So what are we going to code? Well, here's the gist of it. We're going to make a simple command line program that's going to prompt the user to enter their age. Then if the user is less than 18 years old, I'm going to print a message that says you can't vote yet. However, if the user is 18 or older, I'll print the message you can vote. To do this, I'll open a new file in the Atom editor named controlflow.exs, and I'll create an age variable, and I'll bind it to the value returned by calling io.gets, passing in the string what is your age. Next, I'll key in if, then just after if, we need to create a Boolean expression. So I'll key in age, then I'll use the less than comparison operator, followed by the integer 18. Next, I'll key in the do keyword, which marks the start of a code block. Now, if this is true, I'll key in the variable named message, and I'll bind it to the string you can't vote. Okay, now we need to handle the case where the age is greater than or equal to 18. So to do this, I'll key in the else keyword, and then just below that, I'll key in the variable message, and I'll bind it to the string you can vote. Next, I'll add the in keyword, which goes hand in hand with the do keyword, essentially closing out our code block. Lastly, I'll print out the message by keying io.puts and passing in the variable message. Okay, did you notice what I screwed up in this code? Let me ask you a question. What data type would you expect the age variable to be? Well, it's capturing whatever we enter in the terminal, which is text or a string. Okay, so knowing that the age is a string, does this comparison make sense? No, not really. It's comparing a string to an integer, which isn't going to do what we're wanting. But let me ask you this. Is this even a valid expression? Well, in an earlier video, I said Elixir is a strongly typed language, which generally means the language requires more discipline. And as an example, it wouldn't generally let you use operators on mixed data types like this. Knowing this, you might be inclined to guess that this expression will throw an error. That would be a good guess, but it would be wrong in this case. Elixir actually allows you to compare different data types. And the reason provided is so that sorting algorithms don't need to worry about the different data types in order to perform a sort. So here's how Elixir evaluates comparisons between different data types. Numbers are less than atoms, which are less than references, and so on. Okay, so this won't throw an error, but it definitely won't work as desired, so let's fix it. We need to transform the string representation of an age to an integer. The way we'll do this is by calling the integer module's parse function, passing in the string to parse. But here's the thing about the parse function. It doesn't return an integer. If you look at the help docs for the parse function, you see that it's going to return either a two-element tuple when parsing is successful, or an air atom when parsing fails. Let's just deal with the happy path right now. In other words, let's just code the solution as if it always works. And later we'll consider how to deal with errors. So if parse works, we get a tuple back, where the first element is the integer value, and the second element will be whatever was found after the integer. Let's try using the parse function in IEX. I'll key in integer.parse, and I'll pass in the string 17, And as you can see, the return value is a tuple where the first element is the integer, and the second element is just an empty string because there's nothing after the 17. Let me change this to parse the string 17 with a new line on the end, and this time we see the new line in the second element of the tuple. Let's do one more example. I'll try and parse the word 10, and as you can see, this time it failed, and it returned an error atom. Now, as I said a moment ago, we're going to ignore errors for the moment and just code the happy path. So do you have any thoughts on how we should deal with the tuple that's returned from the parse function? We need to extract the first element out of the tuple and use that value down here. What about the second element of the tuple? Do we care about it? Not really in this case. We can just ignore it. Okay, so the way we'll handle this is with pattern matching, which we've done before. So on the left side of the call to parse, I'll key in a set of curly braces, and I'll use the match operator. The first element of the returned tuple is the parsed integer, which we need. So I'll key in the same age variable in the first element of the tuple, which will rebind age to the parsed integer. Are we done? Nope, we've got to match the exact shape of the returned tuple. Since the parse function returns a two-element tuple, we've got to make this represent a two-element tuple. So I'll key in a comma, but what should we put here? Well, if we cared about this value, we'd either use a variable to bind to the return value, or we might use some sort of literal value if we wanted to make an assertion about what the value should be, but in this case, we really don't care what the value is. Do you remember that special character I showed you in a previous video that matches any value and essentially disregards the value? It's the underscore, which works well in this scenario. So do we have any other problems in this code? Let's try running it to see what happens. To do this, I'll key in Elixir, followed by the file name, and I'll press enter. And no bueno. We've got problems. We see a few warnings here. It's telling us that the message variable on these two lines are unused. But didn't we use it right here? Let's look at the other warning. Right here it's saying on this line that the variable message doesn't exist. So it thinks maybe message is supposed to be a function, and it's trying to convert it to a function call, but that's not right. Do you have any thoughts on what's happening here? Well, the problem is the message variable that we're using here and here isn't accessible outside their respective code blocks. Now down here in the puts function, the message variable just doesn't exist in this outer scope, so it doesn't work. So how do we fix this? Some of you might be tempted to do something like adding a message variable in the outer scope and setting it to something like nil. This kind of looks like something that might work in other languages. Okay, let's see if this works here. Well, it's giving us some warnings, but it's prompting for our age, so let's keep going, and we'll look at the warnings in a moment. I'll key in 17 for the age, and nothing printed, so it didn't work. Let's take a closer look at the warnings. Well, the warning is saying the same thing we saw last time. It's saying the message variables, here and here, are unused, so I guess adding this line here didn't help. The problem here is that the message variables are scoped within their respective blocks, from here to here and here to here. So this message variable and these message variables are totally unrelated because of how they're scoped. All right, so how do we fix this? Okay, as I mentioned earlier, everything in Elixir is an expression. So this if-else block is an expression, and it returns a value. So we could get rid of this, and since these two strings are the last lines in each block, they will be the respective return values. Now we can just change this message variable, and instead of binding it to nil, we can bind it to the value returned by the if expression. Okay, let's try running this code now. Okay, I'll key in the age 17, and we see the string, "You can't vote yet." Now I'll try it again with an age of 18, and we see the string, "You can vote." Cool, it works. So here's the thing. I want to add one more possible message. If the person's age is 25 or older, I want the message to say you can vote and you can run for office. But the problem is, Elixir doesn't have an else if clause like many other languages do. So how can we deal with this? Well, that's what we'll look at in the next video.